All right. Welcome, Harry, to the podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Happy to be here.
At first, when I saw you, I thought that was a virtual background because it's such a perfect looking kitchen. I do see the mill behind you.
It's real. This is a real background. So, but yeah, we got Mill Food Recycler happily hanging out there.
Awesome. So we've talked to your co-founder, Matt, before, but I've yet to catch up with you, and I'm excited to see you up here in Seattle at the Smart Kitchen Summit. You were there early days at Nest, and I love this evolution because I focused on smart home for a long time, and then I went into the kitchen. Sounds like something similar to what you're doing. And so you were at Smart Home, you were there early days. What was that like when you were at the Nest at the very beginning, pretty much at the very beginning?
I mean, I think like the thing that was so fun and exciting and unique about Nest was that we were really guided by this principle that, hey, let's try to make something beautiful, that's really useful, that's justifiable to your spouse, that can save you money, that can also do something good for the planet. And I wouldn't say the mindset was, hey, we're creating, the connected home industry, or we're making a connected device first and foremost. We were just really focused on solving a problem for people and also solving a problem for the planet. But I think the thing as I look back at the early days there, many of the decisions we were making, the way we were thinking about how controls were set up, how the user interface, where communications were, privacy protocols, all of it was really foundational work. And for me, it felt just exciting to solve problems for folks and to build this business. But in retrospect, I feel a lot of pride for how far the industry has come.
There's a couple things that Nest did in particular. One was the design was really great. It made smart home move from this world of like X10 and kind of these clunky looking things that looked like engineers should install to one that was a great design, very Apple centric. It makes sense giving the background, Tony coming over. And then you had this message that you got across into the broader consciousness of, hey, we can use the smart home to help you save money around your energy bill. Those are two things I think you conveyed really well and really help, I think, drive the company's success.
So much of what got me excited about Nest in the early days was the planetary impact. And when we looked at heating and cooling as a percentage of energy bills, it was a huge number, like 40%. And when you looked at thermostats, none of them were programmed. And you could save real dollars in that way. And it felt just like a tractable, solvable problem. A real lesson we've learned that has driven us, though, is if you want mass adoption, tens of millions of households to sign up, and I'll speak for myself as an American, like we're fundamentally self-interested, pretty lazy people. So when we think about the messaging or when you think about the benefits or the value that a product is going to bring, it needs to deliver real value in the home versus saying, hey, you should adopt this thing because it's good for the planet or something like that.
Agree. And then at some point, I think you started a new company. I'd love to hear a little bit about the story of where this concept came from. But I think you're applying some of the same lessons that you had when you started Nest or you were with Nest. You had this great design. I think the Mill is actually a really good looking device. And then ultimately, there's a story you're trying to tell to the consumer who buys it, saying, hey, let's stop wasting less food. This will help you be more conscious of that. Oh, by the way, you're doing something good for the planet.
Okay. This is like maybe a longer story, but
Go for it.
I joined Nest in the early days. Nest was acquired by Google. I spent about 5 years inside Google in various roles, helping, scale up the hardware organization. And honestly, I woke up one day and I was just kind of bored out of my mind. And I think, I was talking to my now wife about it. This was back in 2019, and she was really encouraging of me to get back to something early stage. Yeah. And this is no knock against what Google is building. It's incredible. I think just my type is early stage. Yeah, I like the early days.
There's a difference between starting something and working within a gigantic company as a small division, right?
Totally. And look, the impact of Nest, and we're in tens of millions of households. We saved enough electricity to power the planet for a year or for a week. So like that's really substantial. But yeah, I had this kind of hunger to get back to the wet clay. And so I left Google, kind of being accepting that I would take on some more risk. And then like 2 weeks later, the pandemic started. Sort of thinking about lots of different ideas of problems to work on. And there was just sort of a day, and it might have to do with we were in lockdown. So you're kind of just sort of living in your own filth. There's kind of a day for me where I just started seeing waste everywhere and like couldn't stop seeing it. and we're sort of trained to ignore waste. You literally throw it away, but there is no away. There's no away. And I don't know, I just look at anything. I happen to have like a spoon on this table, and it's like, okay, what's going to happen to this spoon? Or a little piece of plastic in my pocket. And you sort of start going down the rabbit hole on waste, and there's a ton of crazy stuff. We're each eating a credit card worth of microplastics every week.
Great. Oh, you didn't have to tell me that, Harry.
Yeah, it's happening. It's in the water.
Yeah.
And then you kind of Google into what's in the landfill. And I was totally blown away that the single largest thing in the landfill is food. And then you kind of tell yourself, okay, well, it's got to be farms, restaurants, stadiums. And actually, no, like 60+% of that food in the landfill comes from households.
Yeah.
And then you kind of think about it a little bit more, and it's like, actually, like, I don't think about food waste that much, but it's really kind of the bulk of it. And it's the stuff that makes your trash stink. And I was reading this paper from USDA. The average American household throws away like 600 pounds of food a year, which is like $2,000 a year worth of loss.
Tons of loss and tons of carbon being emitted.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about transportation from an emissions standpoint, but the agricultural sector is like 25% of emissions, and we throw away about 40% of the food we grow. Work that math out. Food waste and loss is between 8 and 12% of emissions, but on the lower side, like it's 3 or 4 times the airline industry. Just food waste.
Yeah.
The issue being it takes a lot of energy to grow food.
Yeah.
Transport it, get it to your home, and then to add insult to injury, when food ends up in the landfill, which is where most of the residential food waste in the United States ends up, it doesn't just break down in a happy way. It actually digests anaerobically without oxygen, and you get methane, which is 80 times worse than CO2. But it's just really messed up when you think like the way it works today is we basically take food, which is mostly water, drive it around in a diesel truck, bury it in the ground, and make poison out of it.
Yeah. It's horrible. So you had this epiphany as you were stuck and seeing everything. You weren't able to leave the house, all this waste happening. And at some point you were bored of Google. You decided to concoct a plan, an idea started to hatch in your mind around maybe there's a business here.
Yeah. I mean, I think the initial insight beyond just, whoa, food waste is a thing, was that it's actually fundamentally a behavior change problem. Mm-hmm. And it's not really about, like, for as big of a chunk of emissions as food waste is, we don't need to invent nuclear fusion here. we just need to stop throwing food in the garbage and burying it in landfills. And that's where the little idea came that, well, maybe there's a new kind of appliance. Maybe there's a new kind of interface that can make this really easy in the home, that can be a super valuable addition to a kitchen. And maybe actually, like, there's a piece of hardware we could build here. And that's the moment when I called Matt, my co-founder, and Matt's amazing. He's one of the founders at Nest, and he had been doing a bunch of climate investing. And I actually called Matt just to get his advice, thinking one of his sort of, someone in his universe,
had already done this, or
yeah,
had
or
thought
I
about
could
it.
or I could team up with them, because I'm not
Yeah.
a hardware or engineer or roboticist by training. And what we ended up building is like somewhere between a thermostat and a motorcycle. So this is a real piece of equipment that we developed, and that was not something I was going to be able to do alone. So I called Matt up, asking him for advice, and he texted me back like 2 hours later saying, "I talked to my wife, Swati. I think I want to come do this with you full time."
Like, had
And
you even asked him, like, or you said, "What do you think of this idea? What do you?" And he just came back, "Let's make a business."
yeah, I mean, he had been thinking a lot about waste prevention, and I think
Mm.
as an investor, looking at the landscape there,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and look, I think like the mega trend. There are two mega trends here to talk about. One is a shift from the waste management industry really evolving into being the materials management industry,
Mm.
where there's an appreciation that we're just not heading towards a future of resource abundance. And we're not going to be able to afford in the future to bury and burn resources.
Mm.
And it's not about recycling, because for the sake of the goodness to the planet alone, it's about recycling because you're going to be able to produce resources as opposed to producing waste, and not have to extract more resources from the planet. And then the second kind of big trend here is a shift from centralized infrastructure to decentralized infrastructure. And I think energy is a good analog for this. It used to be, if we needed energy, we made a big centralized power plant.
Mm.
And now you can think about that grid becoming more distributed.
Yep.
Solar panels,
Solar.
wind, batteries, thermostats on walls,
Yep.
and this felt like a similar idea for the materials industry, where, hey,
Yeah.
can this be a little recycling center that's in your house?
I love that you talked about the decentralization of recycling. I remember talking to Dave Friedman, who's the founder of Climate Corp, who actually started Canna, which ultimately didn't make it. But the primary motivation for him was, let's stop shipping tons of water around instead, and let's make our drinks locally, because quite honestly, all you're really shipping that matters is the flavor molecules. And so this is a completely different concept, but this idea of decentralization of everything, I think this falls in line with that broader theme that you're talking about as a megatrend.
Totally, and similar in that moving water around is expensive and it's heavy. And I think we care about decarbonizing the economy, because it feels like an important problem to work on, but also because there's a massive economic shift that's going to happen to lower carbon systemic approaches. But the key is that if we're going to change systems, we need new systems that are better, faster, cheaper than the existing systems, to really change things at scale.
So I've been playing with the Mill. I have the first generation. I think it's a great appliance. I love that it takes my food waste and makes it less smelly. And then we can upcycle it into chicken feed, or I can put it in my backyard.
Yeah.
I think, and you guys have evolved. You have part two, and I know that you guys are looking for other routes to ultimately take the pellets or whatever they're called and use them in a good way.
Yeah.
So talk about the evolution of the business. You put out the second generation. How are we building this business? What's next?
Just for folks at home or on the go that aren't familiar with Mill, we make this appliance.
Yep.
And it basically eats all the food that you don't eat. And what we do is we grind the food up and we take the water out of it. Yep. And food's about 80% water. So that makes it really small. And it doesn't smell at all. And we can talk about like the exciting world of figuring that out as well. But for me and my wife, Rachel, we cook a lot, and it takes the bin about a month to fill up, because it
really compresses it down.
Totally. And the paddles inside the device can exert thousands of pounds of force. So mango pits, avocado pits, you name it, everything can go in there. And then that's part of the business, is making it really easy in your kitchen to like never have to take the trash out. And sorry, sidebar, I was just looking at some research in the state of California, where now composting or source separating food scraps is mandatory. And the research showed that like folks were spending in California, since that legislation passed, on average 2 to 4 more minutes per day on food cleanup in the kitchen. And like, the thinking was like that's actually a lot of time on an annual basis that you're spending, to quote unquote do the right thing with food. And the first part of the story is, okay, can we make something amazing for your kitchen? The second part of the story is, where does this material go? And Michael, you nailed it, that there's like a bunch of different uses. Most of the United States does not have curbside collection for food scraps. So our initial feeling was, well, let's make sure that there's a loop, because we feel not good, like we're not delivering the whole product experience if you have this really pleasant dehydrated material that's still food and you don't have anywhere for it to go. So the first loop we built, and we actually got FDA approval for this, was to turn the material into an ingredient in chicken feed. And that was through partnership with the U.S. Postal Service. And you can push a button in the app and the Postal Service will come pick it up. Now, we're starting, that's like one big national loop. Now we're starting to build local loops to connect food back to farms. So in Phoenix, for example, we've partnered with an awesome farmer called JD Hill, who runs a farm called Recycled City. And JD will come to your house on a monthly basis to collect the material, get it back to the farm. And when he's picking up the grounds from your mill, he can drop off vegetables from the farm. So it's like full local closed loop, which is pretty cool. We're working on thinking about how you could get a dividend of eggs from that chicken feed as well. And then there's at-home use as well. So the material is dried food. So it can be a great feedstock in a compost pile, but you can also use it pretty sparingly because it's very potent as a fertilizer if you want to mix it in with soil in a garden bed. But a lot of the feeling here is we need to make sure we're building these tight circular loops to keep the food in the food system.
Yeah, you guys have definitely evolved. I've been enjoying watching the new ways in which you could take what the mill produces and put it to good use. And you're so right in that there's so much energy and calories packed into that, and you could put it into feed, etc. I want to ask you a little bit about looking forward, where you see mill going. Do you ultimately see getting into food waste prevention? One of the things I'm passionate about in the consumer space is there's just very little innovation happening in the world of like Tupperware. The fridge is the same thing we've been doing ever since I was born. It's the same giant cold box where I push food to the back and it goes bad. I'm not saying you can solve all these problems, but are you thinking about it? And maybe is there something in the future the mill will work on some of these problems?
Waste prevention is the goal. Diverting material from landfill is very beneficial, and we think that there's a lot of opportunity in that to make it easier in your kitchen, but also make it economically beneficial for you as a person. Like in a lot of places in California, you can spend less on waste collection if you put less in the landfill bound cart. But better than diversion is source reduction, is not having food waste in the first place. And I think a really fertile, no pun intended, I don't even think that's a very good joke, but like a really fertile area for investigation for us that we're starting to tap into is helping folks change behavior upstream when they shop. And it's interesting, if you poll Americans, NRDC did a study, I believe, where they asked average American, do you think you waste more, about the same, or less food than the median American? And like 78% of people said, I think I waste less than the median. And that's just like not how medians work.
Yeah.
And something really interesting that we've seen, and you don't need the app to use this product, but it does have a scale in it. And we measure how much food waste you put in every time the lid is open and can present that data back to you. And something interesting, I'm curious, Michael, if you've had this experience, folks see, oh, wow, I put 50 pounds into Mill last month. Like, it sort of gets you thinking about how could I shop differently? How could I shop smarter? For us, it's these Persian cucumbers that come in a little bag that go slimy. And it's like every time we find ourselves dumping 3 or 4 of those in there, it's a little bit of a cue to think, did we have to buy those when we bought them? Or could we have done a bit more meal prep there? And that's real money that you're saving.
Part of my behavior change is like, stop going to Costco. My kids, one's at college, just go to Trader Joe's and buy 1 or 2 of each. And so I think part of the behavior change has been driven home by things like Mill, because like with Nest, I was able to actually quantify in an app how much I'm wasting on energy every month. And if you could do that with Mill, I think that drives home that message a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's like things that don't get measured don't really move. And also things that are invisible to you, I think naturally sort of flow below the surface area. And I feel like the magic of this product is we're taking the yuckiest part of trash and making it actually kind of a pleasure to deal with, and also put you in a position to take action on it.
Well, Harry, this is a great story. I'm a big fan of the product, and I'm excited to hear more about the story of Mill at Smart Kitchen Summit with my good friend Stacey Higginbotham and you on stage talking about it. And so looking forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Michael. Can't wait.
Hey, Stacey Pacheco. Welcome.